This is Ardetha talking about how Nurse broke Dead by Daylight, which is a very timely thing, very timely video, considering that Nurse is finally getting some another add-on rework and a couple changes to not her base kit, but the way her base kit interacts with, you know, perks and survivors. So, yeah.
Strongest killer in Dead by Daylight. Even people who have never played the game know that she is effectively the Darth Vader of DBD. If you're against an experienced Nurse player,
wouldn't that be Palpatine? Palpatine stronger than... Sorry, Star Wars brain talking.
You better start praying that it ends quickly and it doesn't hurt too much. She's dominated the game for 6 entire years, and despite plenty of nerfs, she remains far from dethroned. Even with 1 or 2 other killers reaching some ridiculous power levels over the years, none have managed to top
Vader,
her.
though? You're true.
But how has she remained unchecked for so long? Allow me to explain to you how the Nurse broke Dead by Daylight and continues to break the game to this very day. The Nurse released on the 18th.
They still didn't touch her base kit. They have still not touched her base kit. Her base kit is the same. Even in this update where they're actually going to address her strength. Still haven't touched her base kit for this day.
18th of August 2016, just 2 months after Dead by Daylight first released, alongside Nia Carlson in Chapter 1, The Last Breath. That's right, the killer that still dominates your matches to this very day was the first ever DLC killer added to the game, so as expected, she's been around the block. It's important to note that the Nurse is a remnant from a different time, not just the old school metas and playstyles being different to what they are now, but behavior's design philosophy was far different to what it is nowadays. They didn't have to worry too much about balance as, quote, we didn't even know how the game worked, they just had a cool idea.
Do they still have an idea of how this game works? Do you think at this point? Do you think at this point in their history, do they still just look at the game sometimes and be like, I don't know what's going on. I don't know what that thing is over there, but like it's ours. it's kind of like me, you know, like my parents, you know, I went to college to become a teacher. I was a teacher for 5 years. And now I play video games on the internet. And people watch me and they're just like, you go, son. I have no idea what your world is like. You go, son. It's just, they're like, I don't know what happened to you. I don't know what happened to you, but you do you, I guess.
And added it in. And I'm sure it comes as a massive shock to hear that the devs weren't too concerned about balance when creating the Nurse, but jokes aside, it's important to remember that once upon a time, Dead by Daylight wasn't the behemoth it is nowadays, and the game genuinely started off as a passion project among a tiny development team. So much so that they didn't even come up with the game's name until it was nearing completion.
I didn't know that.
As such, due to the Nurse requiring a drastically different playstyle to the rest of the killer roster, and the entire player base being much less skilled at the game, as once again the game was literally 2 months old at the time, the Nurse's kit used to be slightly different but far stronger than it is nowadays. Original Nurse. Movement speed 100%, the same as a sprinting survivor. Default blinks 3, significantly stronger add-ons, no light burn weakness, and the maximum possible blinks was 7. If you thought modern day Nurse was bad, just imagine her with extra movement speed.
You ever get mad at a Nurse because she messes up her blink and then she just blinks again and hits you? imagine having to deal with that 5 more times after that. 5 more times. 5 more times after those first 2. Oh man. Oh lord.
Coming at you with 7 entire blinks. Even in those days where people barely had a basic understanding of the game as a whole, let alone the Nurse as an individual character, it was clear that she was too powerful. The ability to teleport large distances and through walls was a huge strength in a game centered around chasing and catching up to survivors, and due to this immense power it would only make sense for her ability to take a decent amount of skill and investment to get good value. But with an almighty 7 blinks, the Nurse could just keep readjusting her position over and over again until she eventually found herself within lunge range.
Okay, so to be fair, okay, this is the thing that will probably get me in trouble. That looked fun. And no fair in any way, but zooming around like that looked hilarious. Just like she was all over the place. She was like woo 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 woo. I mean, like it's hell for the other person. Hell for the other person. But that looked like a good time. That looked like a good time. You gotta admit. Just, like, I'm everywhere at once. Woo! Right, Westwall and Das, I appreciate you. Thank you for hanging out. Come on, that's gotta be fun.
Kind of hard not to get value, but even if she somehow didn't land a hit with that many blinks, her movement speed being the exact same as Survivor's meant that she really didn't get punished much for poor plays. Things needed to change. So, just over 1 month after the nurse's release, on the 23rd of September 2016, patch 1.1.2 released, bringing some well-needed changes to the nurse.
I want to point this out, and this is completely aside from anything having to do with the nurse. The Borgo is so red that under his filters that he has in the game, the map is literally starting to look like an infrared sensor. You know, like they'll have like the heat sensor that like reads temperatures, like in like shows and movies. It's starting to look like one of those. Like it's starting to look like one of those in the background, which is just. How much did you mess with the color palette of this map that even a filter is like creating that intense of a reaction? Like, Lord.
Nurse. Nerf. Added the light burn vulnerability to the nurse. Nerf. Reduced default blink count from 3 to 2.
That's where it is today.
Nerf. Reduced movement speed from 100% to 96.25%.
Hello, hey, Shadows.
Nerf. Various add-on nerfs, including the extra blink add-ons. After these changes, her maximum possible amount of blinks was now 5, down from the previous 7.
It's just 5.
And these changes achieved 3 things.
It's 5.
They brought down her overall power level, they made her take more skill, and they added some direct counterplay for survivors. They now made the nurse require considerably more skill to perform well, as she had to actually get good with her blink ranges, as she could only adjust her position with secondary blinks a few more times.
Guys, I play Nurse like once a month, and I almost always 4K. Do you? Do you really have to be good? Do you really have to be good with Nurse? I play Nurse like once a month, and I almost always 4K. Do you have to be good with Nurse's blinks? Do you? Do you really? It takes me like maybe like a gen to be like, oh, okay, here's the muscle memory back, and then I'm good. Right? Like, I literally don't play that character because she makes me motion sick. Like, she makes me want to throw up. So I don't play her. But every once in a blue moon, I'll be like, oh, I haven't played Nurse in a while. I'll try it again. And then I always do well. I always do well.
And with that reduced movement speed, the blinks would no longer be just her ability, but her mobility too. While of course she could always blink around the map for better mobility and pressure, before, weaker Nurse players could kind of get away with walking around a lot of the time, only really blinking over loops or walls. This was no longer the case. It's also worth noting that while it was possible for her to have 5 blinks, the add-on nerfs now meant that having 5 blinks would come with a pretty hefty downside of those 5 blinks being incredibly short. So realistically speaking, the highest amount of blinks that she could have without it harming her more than helping her was 4. The direct counterplay aspect came from the light burn mechanic. If you don't know what that is, then I can't really blame you, as it is kind of a neglected mechanic in the grand scheme of things, but Lightborn is a mechanic that affects only the Nurse and the Wraith, which makes them extremely vulnerable to flashlights while interacting with the Shadow Realm. What this means is if you shine a flashlight at an invisible Wraith or a Nurse holding her blink in her hand, it will pull them both out of their powers and stun them, even if you're not pointing the flashlight at their face. This also affects the Nurse in an additional way, where if you point the flashlight at her while she doesn't have the blink in her hand, she is totally blocked from using her power until the flashlight is no longer being pointed at her, and this mechanic still affects her to this very day. While she was clearly extremely strong before these nerfs, nobody had truly mastered her yet, and even with these nerfs, the Nurse's reign of terror was only just getting started. Slowly but surely, a small and dedicated portion of the community would dedicate hundreds of hours to mastering the Nurse, getting to know all of her strengths, weaknesses, and quirks to become absolute powerhouses. With insanely accurate blinks, never falling for mind games, and next level map pressure, it was around this time that Nurse players started figuring out how to play her optimally, and the results were sheer terror for survivors. But despite this, the Nurse's kill rate remained incredibly low, in fact the lowest out of any killer in the game. How was there such a huge disconnect between the Nurse's kill rate and her actual strength? 2 reasons: difficulty and clunky feeling gameplay. Due to a lack of visual feedback showing the nurse how far she would blink, players would have to learn her blink ranges and charge times the hard way, trial and error. New nurse players were guaranteed to take a beating in their first few games as they had no way of knowing how far they were blinking without working it into their muscle memory. And due to the nurse now being the only killer in the game slower than survivors, without those blinks she's going to have a horrible time. In fact, what's even weirder is that there was a visual indicator that showed you how far the nurse would blink, but it was only accessible via one of her rarest add-ons. So the one thing that new nurse players needed is something that they would barely ever get the chance to use. So the first few games for new nurse players would result in them getting absolutely stomped, like 0 to 1 kill, and it would take lots of repeats of this beatdown before they would finally start doing well. But the thing is, the overwhelming majority of players would give up on the nurse before they've had their time to shine. Not just because nobody likes getting annihilated in their games, but also because there were so many frustrating, clunky, and unfun mechanics and interactions nurse players would have to deal with. The main one being fatigue. After the nurse blinks, she has a short window to start an attack, and whether she attacks or not, she goes into a fatigue, in which her movement speed is reduced even further, her screen gets significantly darker,
and that's what
her
makes me
camera
nauseous.
is forced to point to the floor,
that's what makes
and
me nauseous.
It vigorously shakes left and right.
Yeah, that's what makes me sick.
I'm sure you can tell just from that description, but this mechanic is extremely annoying at best and downright nauseating at worst.
Yeah, that's why I don't play her. That's literally why I don't play her. I literally want to throw up. Remember, I played her Monday? Not yesterday, but like a week or two ago. And I literally ended stream a little early because I played nurse, and then I wanted to, like, I literally was nauseous for like the rest of the night. Like, I wanted to throw up. Like, it is actually nauseating. If you get motion sick, you can't play this character. If you are somebody who is easy to get motion sickness, you literally can't play this character. Because she will make you motion sick. My eyes are kind of straining right now just watching this video. I'm not even kidding you. Like, I'm getting kind of like the eye strain of like reading my phone while being in the car. You know, that kind of feeling. I'm getting that just by watching the video. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. I'm getting that by watching the video. Like, she is sickening.
Every video game I've ever seen, heard, or played, I have never seen any game get as much accessibility backlash as DBD did for the nurse's fatigue. Many players straight up cannot play her or they will get sick.
Hi, that's me! Hi, that's me! I play her like once a month because of that. Hi, that's me! Hi! Hi, that's me.
The idea behind this mechanic was to give survivors a chance to escape the nurse, break line of sight, and hide away, because stealth was still a thing back when the nurse was designed. And while I understand the goal, there is no denying that the execution is terrible. But what makes it even worse is, this fatigue gets half a second longer for each additional blink used. So newer and lower skilled nurse players who needed to use more blinks on average
I use the decreased fatigue add-on for that reason. That's why I use that. Like I probably wouldn't go into like, you know, range recharge because I'm not a try hard loser. But I probably use like some of the more fun add-ons, like the fly past them and scream add-ons and stuff like that. Like, if that was not so bad, but I use that add-on to avoid that.
Face longer fatigue time. But wait, there's more. Lunging would increase the fatigue by a whole entire second too.
Yeah, I use the add-on
So imagine being a brand new nurse player who uses all of your blinks to catch up, and then you miss your swing, and in turn you get an even longer fatigue time, even more time looking at that nauseating screen shake. That alone is enough to stop most people coming back to the nurse. So how does this tie into the nurse having low kill rates? Well, if players are almost guaranteed to do poorly in their first few matches, but also stop playing her after those first few poor matches, you can see how the stats will get all the low kill rates from new nurses, but then never get any of the high kill rates from good nurses, as most people give up before ever becoming a good nurse.
I've said this before, and we had that really long video where I talked about this. The main problem with behavior and the way they treat data, and trust me, I taught economics. I've literally taught a subject where stats are important. Analyzing data is just as important as reading the data itself. You can read a stat and go, that's a cool stat. But you have to analyze the context of why it exists and why it happens and what led to it, all that stuff. You got to consider the variables that led to that stat existing. Which, you know, like you said, is like, you know, people quitting nurse after, you know, either nausea or not having a good time with her or not wanting to, like, learn economics and money stuff. Yeah. And there's tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of stats in economics. Tons of stats in economics. Tons.
Teaching econ?
Respect, yeah. It was more rough for me because I'm not a math person. And there's a lot of, like, not like, you know, math problems, but it's like math concepts. But yeah. Yeah, I taught economics once upon a time. Thank you for 100 bits, though. I appreciate that. How did you teach that? That was one semester. I taught that for one semester. And even though it was on my resume or something I taught, like, they just never made me teach it again. I was mostly a world history nerd. World and U.S. history was mostly what I taught. That's where, no matter where I taught, that's where they liked to give me mostly. Usually I didn't end up teaching. Like, I taught econ once. I taught government a couple times. No, I think I got government 3 times. And then I got geography 1 time. But yeah.
We have a ridiculously overpowered killer, but due to them being very difficult, plus some poor design choices, not many people play her. Sounds like things needed to change, and they did. On the 23rd of January 2018, patch 1.9.0 released, with some new nurse changes. What were they? Buff. The nurse no longer has a shorter lunge range than any other killer, as back then lunge range was tied to movement speed. Buff. Yeah, the nurse can now look down to reduce the range of a blink that she charged too far. Buff. The nurse can now freely blink up and down between floors by looking up or down. Okay, while
do you think if they got rid of that, that would help? Like, if she couldn't go up and down? Do you think that would help? Dyscalculia? Man, I've had so many people growing up who also had dyscalculia. Terrible. I'm sorry. I am sorry. Like, the way they have described to me how they see numbers, like, I feel bad. Maybe, yeah. It might be. Not sure. If she couldn't go through floors. Interesting.
Buffing the nurse of all killers was certainly a controversial decision. It seems like the goal behind these changes was to make her slightly less frustrating to play as, and as someone who used to play the
I had my friend describe dyscalculia to me this one time. So dyscalculia is dyslexia for numbers. So, like, for example, like, this is going to be a complete aside, but, like, you know, we're on a tangent here. So, like, my friend described this to me once. Like, Lily sat me down and was like, I want to show you, like, what numbers look like in my brain and why I get confused. They showed me, so let's take the number 3, right? Take the number 3. So that's number 3, right? Simple, easy. Here, let me make that a little bit cleaner. This is the number 3, right? Simple, easy, right? They said to me that, like, their brain has a hard time reading numbers because for some reason it makes, like, they can see the similarity in the way they look. So, like, she would see, like, 3, but sometimes would read it as 5 because besides this top part, it's the same, right? Besides this part right here, that's a 5, right? Right? And since we're talking about 5 kind of looks like what number? 6. Like, and if, like, she would say that, like, she just, like, would do this all the time. Like, she would try to read a number and she would see both or one or the other and never see what it actually was because she would see, you know, the similarities between the numbers. And it was just like, you know, like, depending on how you write your letters, here's another good one. You would write, you know, C1, like 1, 7, right? Like, it's like, you know, that was just her experience, but, like, when she actually showed that to me, I was like, oh my god, that sounds terrible. I'm sorry you have to go through that, you know? Like, that sounds annoying, like, really annoying that your brain just, like, sees that and, like, it kind of, like, jumbles up what it's seeing because it sees those similarities. It's cool that you can see the similarities, like, that's neat, but it's definitely hindering, like, really, really hindering
the nurse a lot at that point in time. The ability to look down to reduce overcharged blinks felt absolutely amazing. but it also meant that the nurse would get punished less if the survivor successfully pulls off a double back on them, which probably wasn't the best change for the overall health of the game, as if the survivor outplays you, you really should be punished for it. While these changes did make her feel much nicer to play as, they didn't quite have the impact the devs hoped. Many new nurse players still couldn't bear the fatigue, and her kill rate still remained the lowest in the game. While the nurse was ungodly overpowered, it was widely considered to be due to her add-ons. Unlike the hillbilly that only had 1 or 2 OP add-on combos, the nurse had plenty to choose from. Range add-ons, travel speed, 4 blinks with no downside, 3 blinks with extra range, 3 blinks with extra speed. It was kind of crazy. Top tier survivors learned that base kit, the nurse did in fact have counterplay. The issue is, this playstyle was drastically different to the way survivors would deal with other killers. Instead of looping, the main priority was always distance, and the second was line of sight. Unfortunately, due to good nurses being very rare, a lot of players never had the opportunity to learn how to deal with her. But top skill survivors respected good nurses as long as they weren't running ridiculous add-ons.
Which they always do.
This era was the nurse's prime.
They always do.
This was the point in time when the nurse was at her strongest since her initial set of nerfs, she felt the best to play, and had absolutely ridiculous add-ons. Bad nurse players would frequently bring in 3 or 4 blinks and still do well, and good nurses could go double blink range and effectively be everywhere at all times. The general consensus of the community was the nurse's add-ons 100% need serious nerfs, but the base kit might be okay. Nerf her add-ons and then we'll see if the base kit needs further nerfs down the line. So, on the 29th of October 2019, almost 2 entire years since the nurse was buffed, a whole host of changes were brought onto her. What were they? Add-on changes. Additional blink add-ons were nerfed, replaced with new effects. Now only 1 add-on gives her an additional blink, but it comes with huge downsides. Blink range add-ons were nerfed. In fact, most, if not all of the nurse's add-ons were changed to either be nerfed or have a brand new effect.
Good.
And unlike the hillbilly, these changes were received very well by the community for the most part.
Yeah,
the nurse's add-ons were widely considered to be the thing that made her go from extremely strong but respectable to absolute BS. So seeing her add-ons be toned down was exactly what we wanted. But of course, things...
I like how the entire time, this is completely aside for the video, the entire time she didn't even turn around once. She was fully committed to her Blair Witch Project roleplay. Like, look at that, look at that. She doesn't move an inch.
What we wanted.
She doesn't move an inch the entire time. She's like, she doesn't see me.
To absolute BS. So seeing her add-ons be toned down was exactly what we wanted. But of course, things didn't stop there. Base kit nerfs. The nurse's ability now counts as 2 separate charges, each with its own cooldown of 3 seconds. This new cooldown stacks on top of her fatigue. This was one of the worst changes they could have possibly made to the nurse. The extra cooldown didn't have any tangible impact on her strength, so it was a fail balance-wise. But what it did do was make her feel even worse to play as. I already covered how...
That's the twins problem. The twins problem? Twins are still moderately good. They're like low A, high B. All the changes they made to that character made him feel so clunky and garbage to play that I never want to touch them. I actually have, like, no issue with playing the twins. Like, running around as Little Man Big World can be fun. But they feel so awful to play. Awful to play. They feel disgusting to play. They feel like garbage. Like, they are so clunky and weird that they just don't... I just never want to play them. Twins still black? Yes, but they are fixing that next patch. That's not in the dev update, but they did say on Twitter today that is going to go through with the mid chapter. So yeah.
Bad the fatigue was, but having a fatigue then a cooldown after the fatigue, that's literally a cooldown on a cooldown. What a ridiculous change. While the add-on changes were certainly what we needed, the base kit changes only made her pick rate and kill rate suffer more, as now not only were new players put off of her even more, but the cooldown was such an annoying feature that a lot of previously dedicated nurses just couldn't put up with her anymore. While there was no denying that she was still incredibly strong, she now found even worse to play than ever before. But surely those add-on nerfs that we got would have brought down her power level to some degree, right? While yes, that is true, I think that loss of power from the add-ons was regained in the form of dedicated servers. Nowadays, it is so common for a nurse to blatantly miss a blink attack on you, swing in the completely wrong direction, and yet the game will somehow give her the hit anyway.
How many times have you guys been hit by a nurse swing that you literally hear the whiff sound? You literally hear the like you hear them fully miss, and it connects. How many of you have had that situation happen where you hear that full swing complete, and then you get whacked, which is whack. Match. Yeah, it's yikes. It's yikes. It happens. Not every match to me, but like, you know, it's pretty frequent. It's pretty frequent.
I think just because of this, power-wise, she's still pretty close to how she was before the nerfs.
Yes.
But now she's just less fun for everyone due to cooldowns on cooldowns for the nurse and terrible servers giving unfair hits for the survivors.
Also, add-ons are still too strong.
This is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the nurse. There are so many other things to talk about, like dead zones, glitches with her being able to get out of bounds or into glitched spots, interactions with her specifically breaking certain perks, then in turn getting the perk nerfed for every other killer. There's just so much to talk about with the nurse that I couldn't possibly cover it all in one video. So now the only question that remains is, what do you think about the state of the nurse? Is there any way of making her fit into the game fairly? Let me know in the comments below, and
so if you guys want to know, real quick, I won't go into this too long because I've already made a video about this. I always said that if you want to make nurse fair, the little entity blockers that show up over lockers and windows or lockers when you're like, you know, you're dredge and you're trying to teleport back to a hook when you're a survivor, and the little white entity blockers like block the lockers so you can't teleport. Just throw those up over pallets and windows, so she still has to play those. Make her play more like Pyramid Head, where she can still go through things, but she still has to respect the things, right? And then undo all this bad quality of life stuff that makes her feel clunky. Make her have to play windows and pallets like everyone else, and then give her quality of life back. That's my idea. Because she can still blink around the window. She can still blink around pallets. She just has to go through specific angles. You know how you do that stuff with, like, Wesker? How you'll be, like, at a long wall, and she'll be, like, the person will vault the long wall window, and then you kind of fake going one way, and then you use your virulent bound to, like, you know, hop back through the window at an angle and, like, catch up that speed. That's like, she would play like that, where, like, she would not be able to go through said window, but she would have to go at an angle and predict where the survivor's going correctly and down them. So, like, I feel like that would be, like, I don't know. I feel like that would be, because, like, that's the main problem with Nurse is not, like, main problem with Nurse is not, like, the fact that she can go through things. It's the fact that she doesn't have to, well, the problem is the fact she can't go through things, but that's, my point being is that, like, she doesn't have to play the game like everybody else. She doesn't have to play pallets. She doesn't have to play windows. Artist, Pyramid Head, great examples of characters that have attacks that go through solid objects that are great characters, but aren't, like, super S tier, right? Like, power, like I said, Pyramid Head and Artist, top 10 characters in the game, not super S tier. Because there is some counterplay. And especially in the case of Artists, not a whole lot. But there is some counterplay to be involved there. Because they still have to respect windows. Still have to respect pallets. Right? If you did that to her, she would still probably be, like, top 5 in the game. She might be better Artist at that point. She might be, like, the 4th best in the game. She would still probably be better than Wesker. Especially considering what we would eventually do to their add-ons, maybe. Yeah, she'd probably be, like, 4th. Like 3rd or 4th in the game, but she wouldn't be as obnoxious as she is now, right? So, yeah, I feel like that would be like an easy way to get around that, and enforce her to, like, spend time, like, kicking a breakable wall, kicking a pallet, so it's not in the way. Like imagine you're trying to, like, you know, you're trying to blink up to the 2nd floor of, like, Dead Dog, right? So we're talking about Dusty News, Dead Dog, and you can't go through that wall right there because there's a breakable wall. You may decide to break it like the rest of us have to. Like, you may stop and break that thing because you're like, okay, I want that out of the way, you know? So that, I don't know. That's my take. That was my little design idea for how I would theoretically fix the Nerf. I made a whole video on that though, so like, I'm not gonna like go too far in depth about like, haha, this is my idea and it's so smart, because like we've been there. I have explained it in a video already. And like I said, pair that with like undoing her quality of life changes, right? Like her quality of life changes that made her worse, or negative life changes. Undo like the incredibly shaky fatigue and stuff like that. Give her something back, because like you said, even with like the small nerfs she received, there were like tons of players that like left to the character, right? Like they stopped playing the character because it was like they were so frustrated with like the changes. So like, you know, if they did that, you would give her something that makes her feel better and more welcoming to play for a majority of the player base, right? Make her less clunky. That way, like, the average player can get into Nurse, and then you're good, right? But yeah. Whew. That is gonna be it for me, though. We did a lot of React Andy times. I am a little bit under the weather. Not too much. But, like, I did watch Nurse gameplay for, like, 12 minutes straight. So I am slightly nauseous. So I'm gonna go get unyucky. Feel a little bit less unyucky. Tomorrow, if there's PTB, we will play it. Otherwise, it is killer time, and it is also indie horror night. So we got some games lined up for that after we play a few hours of Debbie Delight. So that's what's coming in the tomorrow zone. We're gonna be doing a Raider Rooney though, Chicken Rooney. Raider Rooney, Chicken Rooney. We're gonna be raiding our good friend and modulator here. Good old Uziel Nato. Uzi.